Live across Adelaide on the ABC Listen app. You're listening to Rory McLaren
on 891 ABC Radio Adelaide.
Soon we'll be taking you up into the Adelaide Hills and we'll look at an issue regarding a number of trees in and around an expanding community in that part of the state. But first, recent estimates have suggested that South Australia has around 9,000 properties listed for short stay accommodation through the likes of Airbnb and other holiday providers. But this also means that they're properties which are unavailable at a time of tight supply for longer term rentals. And in February, if you remember, Parliament's upper house moved to set up an inquiry into the South Australian short stay sector. Well, yesterday it met for the first time and took evidence. Robert Sims is the Greens MLC and he pushed to set this committee up. He's also the committee's chair. Robert Sims, good morning.
Good morning, Rory.
Robert Sims, remind us exactly what is this committee looking at?
Yeah, so this committee's been given a pretty broad remit. It's looking at the impact of the short stay accommodation sector on affordable housing in the state and on the supply of rentals. It's also looking at what measures can be taken to regulate the industry and looking at examples in other jurisdictions. And it's also looking at this question of long-term vacant property and what impact that has, recognising, of course, that at the last census there were 84,000 homes that were vacant here in South Australia. Now, of course, not all of those are long-term vacancies, but even if just a small fraction of them are long-term vacancies, that's potentially having an effect on the market too. So it's looking at the whole range of options that might be available to us.
Now, yesterday you heard evidence from a peak body which represents parts of the short stay sector. You mentioned regulation there. What did this body have to say about the idea and the concept of regulation?
Yeah, so we heard from the Short Stay Accommodation Association, which represents owners of some of these short stay rentals. Really interesting, they were in favour of having a form of regulation and a code of conduct for short stay operators. They referenced New South Wales as being an example. So in that state, if you list your property on a platform like an Airbnb, you have to register it on a government portal. You pay a registration fee of around $60. And you also have to follow a code of conduct. Now, they were saying that the registration fee should be a little bit higher to cover the administration of the portal. And they were in favour of that model because it also gives them the opportunity to get rid of those operators that aren't doing the right thing, you know, those that are maybe running party houses or bringing the broader sector into disrepute. So that was interesting evidence to hear from the association.
So the association itself saying, hey, here's a model that works interstate. It could potentially work here.
That's right. And the thing about South Australia is, you know, we're pretty unique in that we have no form of regulation at all of this industry. And it has shifted focus over the last few years significantly. I think when Airbnb first popped up on the market and other short stay platforms, it was kind of, you know, someone just renting out their spare room. And now it's become whole properties that are listed. And I think that really turbocharged over COVID when we saw a lack of interstate travel and people travelling more locally. People have realised that it can be a lot more lucrative to list their property on, say, an Airbnb rather than having it with a long-term rental. And so we want to look at what we can do to incentivise people to move those properties off the short stay market too.
But Robert Sims, to play devil's advocate here, if people own investment properties and they want to use them to generate the most income possible for their families as part of an investment strategy, and if they've made financial decisions based on the current rules and regulations, why should they face increased costs and barriers?
Well, whenever you invest in the market, there's the potential for change. That's the nature of free market economics. Conditions change all the time and government changes conditions. But also, might I say, I think housing isn't just a commodity. This idea that we treat housing as an asset class in Australia, I think is what's got us into this mess, because it's allowed some people to accumulate loads and loads of properties while we have other people who have nothing, people sleeping on the street and people who can't get into the market. So we've got to strike a better balance. I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, look, if you're making a significant profit off your investment and you're running it in effect as a business, that you might need to register that business and comply with some certain code of conduct, as happens in most business decisions. So I don't think that's unreasonable.
So you've heard from the short stay sector yesterday. You also heard from the Lord Mayor, Jane Lomax-Smith. What did she have to say? Because we know the City Council has been grappling with how to handle short stay rentals for years now.
Yeah, that's right. And look, credit to the City Council, because under the Lord Mayor's leadership, they have been a real leader, I think, in this space. They're the first council in South Australia that's actually charging a differential rate to short stay accommodation. So basically, and the Lord Mayor articulated this pretty clearly at the inquiry yesterday, she said, look, why is it that somebody who has a residence is paying the same rate as someone who might be having a business set up next door to them? That doesn't seem fair, given the impact that a short stay rental might have on council services and the like. So council now charges them a differential rate. The challenge, though, that the Lord Mayor identified is that it's really difficult for council to be able to gather all of the data on which properties are actually running as an Airbnb or on short stay. And so she was also advocating for regulation from the state government, because that would assist the council also in being able to get that data and be able to make decisions around rating.
So we know that the way that the council's operating, but if we stretch this out at a state level, and is there a challenge here for the state government when it comes to potentially providing any sort of, or moving to any sort of levy structure, given its previous commentary with regards to not introducing new taxes and levies?
Yeah, and look, I think it was silly of the government to make that commitment at the last election. I mean, I've been advocating for them to, say, put a levy on the banking sector, for instance, that's been making a mozza in terms of profits, and put that money into public services. So it was silly of them to get themselves into that situation. But look, I think in terms of whether the government might look at levies and the like, it may be that we're running out of time in this parliament to initiate change in that regard. My hope is that I want to see this report come out by the latter half of this year, so that there is a window to take some action in the parliament before the election. But that also that could potentially be part of the platforms of the different political parties too. And so we could deal with this in the new parliament if we run out of time as well.
So just on that, you want to try and get a report through within months, but you are going to run out of weeks for any sort of potential legislation, given it's pretty unlikely at this stage that Parliament will return in 2026 ahead of the election.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why, I'm doing everything I can to try and make sure we move through this by the first half of the year and we come up with some recommendations. It'd be great if we could get them moved on in the Parliament before the election, but if not, I think there's some clear stuff there that could be part of, people's election commitments. Could I say just on this question about a levy too, one of the things I find really frustrating about the debate around this is, and we've seen this in South Australia at the moment over Gather Round, there's some Airbnbs that are making huge profits at the moment. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask those businesses to pay a small levy that can contribute towards constructing public housing. That's what they're doing over in Victoria. They've only just implemented it, and so we'll look closely at how that's rolling out in practice. But I certainly don't think that's an unreasonable impulse.
So just to remind us as well, Robert Sims, before I let you go, as to what are some of the regulatory structures interstate. We obviously talk about New South Wales. Victoria does it differently though.
Yeah, they do. So they apply a tax on long-term vacant property. So property that's vacant for a year accrues 1% tax on the value of the property, and that escalates up to 3% over 3 years. But then also they charge a levy on Airbnb and other short stay platforms, and it works out to be 7.5%, I think, for the stay. Now, the money that's raised then goes through to building more public housing. I don't think that's an unreasonable proposition, and it's a pretty small impost in the scheme of things if someone's paying hundreds of dollars to stay in accommodation and they pay an extra $10 on top. So I don't think that's unreasonable, but I do want to look at what's happening in terms of how that's working. Then other states have approached this differently. WA, for instance, has implemented, in effect, what is an incentive scheme. So they offer Airbnb owners and short stay owners $10,000 to move their properties off the short stay platform and to get a long-term tenant. that's also something that I think we want to look at and find out whether that's working too. So there's a range of options available here, carrot and stick.
At 26 minutes to 10, Kerry has rung in. Good morning to you, Kerry.
Yes, good morning, Rory. I wanted to make a couple of comments, please. I've been a long-term Airbnb proprietor and also involved with many others. I think what the citizen needs to understand is that the numbers aren't real you're talking about. Many people only just do their properties for events like Gather Round, and there wouldn't be enough accommodation if people did offer their properties. So your numbers aren't real. Many of the clients I work for would not make their properties available for long-term rent. They use it to go interstate. They use it to go on holidays themselves. So Airbnb isn't this evil thing of not giving properties out for long-term rental. They're just not available, and you don't know the real numbers, and just blaming Airbnb opportunities and saying, oh, you'll have long-term housing. No, you won't, because they just wouldn't do it. Their property isn't available for long-term, only for short-term. My second thing is, as also an investment landlord, I worked very hard, 3 jobs to get my investment property, so I think it highly inappropriate for you to say that it's just become an asset-making thing. That's the way I chose to work hard and make money. Other people can do that as well. And the third thing is the Residential Tenancies Act has made it so difficult that I don't want to rent out my property long term, because I can't even ask a tenant at the end of a lease to leave unless I'm moving back in. And you don't have all the reasons that a tenant is bad, is they don't do your garden, they don't clean your house. It becomes a wreck when you get it back. So I think there's many other factors not being considered here, which isn't fair.
Kerry, I think you make a reasonable point there with regards to, at the end of tenancies, the challenges that some landlords are facing.
Exactly. And also for the short-term rental, they're not available. I've know several clients who their properties, at least 10 of them, would not be available for long-term rental. Now you multiply that out, get your facts and your figures right.
Kerry, thank you very much for your contribution. Robert Sims, I'll give you an opportunity to react there.
Yeah, look, in terms of the point around data, I think that's one of the reasons why it would be really useful to have this registration scheme in place. And indeed, that was the point that was made by the Short Stay Association yesterday. You know, I put to them 9,000 properties being listed on these platforms. They said they thought it's closer to 11,000. No one is suggesting that all of these properties could be put into the long-term rental market, but even if a small portion of them are, then that could have some effect. To Kerry's point about the fact that she's worked hard and she's been able to buy multiple investment properties, great for her, and kudos to her for that. I also know lots of people in the community who are working really, really hard, who work multiple jobs and have no chance in hell of ever getting into the housing market because the prices have just skyrocketed out of control. And so this idea that just because one person has worked hard and been able to buy multiple properties, they should therefore have exclusive control over that asset and have no responsibility to others that can't get into the market, I totally disagree with. And I think it's that mindset that has been contributing to the housing crisis at the moment.
Robert Sims, thank you very much for your time this morning. We'll keep in touch
Rory.
as this committee continues its work throughout the coming months. Lots of you wanting to have your say on the text line as well. Tell him those businesses pay taxes on their income. And another one from Verity. Hi, Rory. It's raining in Aberfoyle Park. Not heavy, but at least water is falling from the sky. Yay, Verity. Thank you very much for your message. Any reports on the weather out there, send them through, 0467 922 891. But next, we're heading to the hills, where a new housing development is sparking concerns about the potential loss of dozens of significant trees.
This could be your big break.
The ABC's Fresh Blood series